And before y'all get married, it pays to know that person's family history, because if not, you could be stuck with a generational curse you had no idea even existed. Story time. So we left off on the part where Jane told John that her family had a curse. Jane would also go on to tell John how her mother would summon demons. She would put hexes on her exes. You see what I did with that?
Please, I don't have any time for any gossip now. Eh? Yes.
Look at you.
Hey y'all, welcome back to All Things Jenny. I'm Jenny. Before you get married, it really does pay for you to find out who it is that you're about to get married to. You're literally about to get into a binding contract with this person. It's very important to know who you're getting married to. And after the story, you might consider this. Let's get into it.
And before y'all get married, it pays to know that person's family history, because if not, you could be stuck with a generational curse you had no idea even existed. Story time. This story submission came straight out of Charleston, South Carolina. And because the person wants to remain anonymous, we're just going to call him John. Right off the rip, according to John, anybody who knows anything about Charleston, South Carolina, knows that that was one of the first places our ancestors were sent during the times of slavery. John also let me know that they're known for their folklore, but also, most importantly, roots. That being said, John is no stranger to the paranormal. In fact, growing up as a kid, all the elders always told stories about the things that would happen after nightfall. But being a kid, you just assume they just want you to come in the house before the street lights come on. But not even that could prepare John for what was to come in his adult life. So it all started back when John was incarcerated. While being incarcerated, he met this woman, and we're just going to call her Jane. So naturally, John getting out of jail, him and Jane were falling fast in love. Shortly after him getting out of jail, they got married. Now, he says that Jane already had 3 kids, which he loved and adored, and basically treated as if they were his own. But Jane and John were like polar opposites. John was more adventurous, so he was like the outdoorsy type, while Jane was a homebody. She didn't really like to do too much. John liked to sleep in complete darkness, while Jane liked to sleep with the TV on. Even if it was on mute, it just made her feel more comfortable having some type of light going in the background. So nothing too crazy. Now, it was a house full of people. John, Jane, Jane's 3 kids, and Jane's grandmother. Because John and Jane are fresh into their relationship, they're trying to learn different ways to compromise with the fact that they do have a lot of differences. One night, John proposes we sleep with the lights off. He says that he can see the lights even though he's asleep, so he knows when it's changing from channel to channel or when something is going off and something else is coming on, and it just hindered him from sleeping. Jane understood, her facing her fear maybe of the dark. She says, fine, we'll compromise and we'll sleep with the TV off tonight. Little did John know, the lights were probably the safest thing in that house. Now remember, John is no stranger to the paranormal, so he is very sensitive to energies. He knows when there's something negative around. So John says they're falling fast asleep, and maybe a little bit after he's getting into his sleep, he feels like a very negative energy hovering over him. John felt like he was being watched. He felt like something was literally hovering over him, watching him and waiting. He said the energy was so strong and so negative that it just woke him up. John said this felt different. Yes, he was no stranger to the paranormal and, spooky things, but this didn't feel like a normal spirit. This felt like something dark. So of course, John's instincts kick in. His first thought is to protect his wife. He pulls her closer, turns the TV back on. This startled her. It woke her up. So naturally, she's like, what's going on? What's wrong? Now, at this point, John says that he's not really scared. He's just more so confused because he doesn't know what's going on. He just feels that something is not right. So he asks Jane, did you feel that? Jane's like, feel what? I'm asleep. So Jane's like, I didn't feel anything. And now John is kind of like getting a little frustrated because he knows what he felt. Remembering what his friend got him, he reached under the bed and grabbed his pew-pew. John is like, I'm going to go and protect my house. So he goes room to room, just trying to make sure all of the doors are locked, windows are locked, and then he goes to check on the kids. Now, the way the kids' rooms are set up, they're all in the same room, they just have different beds. Once he realized that the kids were fast asleep, his mind was put at ease. He didn't feel necessarily like he needed to go in the grandma's room, so he didn't. He went back to his wife and he pretty much just lets it go. But it's still this eerie feeling of him being watched. So because John and Jane got married so abruptly, he didn't really know a lot about Jane or her family. He was excited, he was in love, and he just wanted somebody to call his own. Days after the situation happens, Jane starts to open up a little bit more about her family and some of the things that go on. Jane goes on to tell John that her family has a curse. Y'all, this story has so many twists and turns, so obviously, we're gonna have parts. I don't want to hear it. Tap in for the next one. If you have a story that you want to tell, I am now taking submissions. It could be about betrayal, spooky stories, an unbelievable story, something that you just can't explain. Feel free to DM me. You don't have to ask. You don't have to beg. Just go ahead and submit your story. If you feel more comfortable, I'll give you my email. Comment for part 2. Go ahead and wake up, because this is part 2. So we left off on the part where Jane told John that her family had a curse. Jane will also go on to tell John how her mother would summon demons. She would put hexes on her exes. You see what I did with that? But no, seriously, her mother would be putting hexes on men who would betray her or cheat on her, lie to her, manipulate her. I mean, the list goes on. But the real tea is that all of this started with Jane's grandmother. The same grandmother that is living with Jane and John, and Grandma's sister. We're gonna call Grandma's sister Valerie. So way back when Grandma and Valerie were kids, Valerie was dating this guy. Everything seemed to be going really good with Valerie and the guy up until Grandma decided that, hey, that's my man now. So yes, you guessed it. Grandma and boyfriend gets down and dirty, and now boyfriend is Grandma's man. Valerie didn't take too kind to Grandma just swooping in and taking her man like that, because that's my man. From that day forward, Valerie decided that she was not gonna allow Grandma to get away with this, and she was gonna take revenge on her own sister. Valerie decides that she's going to take a trip to a witch doctor and hex her sister and the boyfriend. Oddly enough, even though all of this was happening, Grandma and boyfriend stayed together for years up until boyfriend died. But Grandma would be constantly attacked, waking up with bruises, as if she had been mauled or attacked by bears. Now don't get it twisted, Grandma was not the only one being hit by these attacks. The boyfriend was also being attacked. The boyfriend ended up being sick, and as far as I know, what John has told me, he continued to be sick up until he passed. Obviously, all of this still made Valerie very jealous. She's doing all these spells, and it's not working. They're still together. So Valerie decides, if I can't beat you, maybe I can be the next best thing close to you. That would be her daughter, Jane's mother, which will make Jane 3 of the 5 generation of women to be cursed in her family. See, Valerie didn't like the fact that the grandmother was able to live her happily ever after, so she decides, I'm going to hex this relationship that Jane has with John. I guess Valerie really wasn't satisfied with the fact that the grandmother and the boyfriend had lived this life together for all of these years, and she vowed that she was going to take them down, even if it meant attacking her own grandniece. Now, as Jane goes on to tell John all of this newfound information, John can't help but to become a little bit uncomfortable with all of this. He didn't sign up for this, but because he loves Jane, he's established that he is the man of the house, he loves Jane's kids and treats them as if they're his own, he's not going to allow this to just run him away. But things continue to get very weird. One day, Jane and John went to a family event. Obviously, the grandmother was there. Nothing crazy. Everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves, eating, playing games, the usual family stuff. Until suddenly, a shoe levitates off of the ground, stops, and literally full throttle towards the grandmother. Hits the grandmother clean in the face. Eventually, everyone started to question what was going on and how were these random events taking place. But they never got a real answer. And as these strange occurrences continued to happen in this house, John and Jane's relationship started to take a turn for the worse. According to John, eventually Jane started to become way more open and honest about her gifts. Jane could also summon demons. Whenever she would sleep, she could see into the spirit realm. John and Jane would also go on to start arguing a lot more, which is something that was not normal within their relationship. Things got so bad that John and Jane were not even intimate anymore. At this point, John is fed up. There's a strain on their relationship that seems to be growing deeper and deeper each day. All of these weird occurrences are happening. And at this point, it's kind of like John is questioning why he's even still in this marriage. Questioning if he even wants to continue to be with Jane. Eventually, things got to the point where John and Jane got separated. They were done with this marriage. John felt like he did the best that he could. He endured. And at this point, it's nothing more that he can do other than leave the relationship. At this point, both John and Jane have accepted the fact that this relationship is not going to last. And they had to accept the fact that things were over. That is until the tables turned. It's so funny how God works. John and Jane were getting ready to find out that this was way more sinister than they thought. Comment for part 3. If you have an interesting, spooky, unbelievable story with twists and turns that you want to tell, I am now taking submissions. Feel free to DM me, and I'll see y'all on the next one. That girl finally got some storage space, so you already know I'm back with the third and final part. It pays to know what you're marrying into and that person's family history. Part 3. So we left off on the part where John and Jane has decided that there's nothing else they can do, honestly, other than leave this relationship behind and separate. Obviously, Jane and John still had a lot of love for each other. I mean, they had been together for a while. And then John, straight out of the penitentiary, came and started taking care of Jane. John explained how Jane had been going through a lot of financial issues. She was late on her bills. And John basically came and stepped in and helped her get caught up with everything. And then on top of that, he allowed her grandma to come in and move. So he actually did everything that he could do as far as being the man of the house. Now, what John didn't know prior to this relationship was that Jane and Valerie, her great aunt, had a really tight-knit relationship. I mean, the auntie basically had Jane wrapped around her finger. So as you can imagine, I mean, Auntie Valerie was prone to getting away with things, especially when it came to Jane. Now, remember how I told y'all Jane had gifts. She could summon demons, she could go into the spirit realm while she was asleep, and she could go into other people's dreams. Jane told John when she was younger she had a dream. Not knowing her gifts, she saw her auntie, Valerie, putting a spell on Grandma. But her being a kid, not knowing what she saw, she kind of chalked it up to maybe it was just a nightmare. But this always stuck with Jane. And in fact, Jane did tell her parents about this. Nobody had any real proof, so it was just kind of thrown to the wolves. Keep that in mind. So John's still having a lot of love for Jane. Even though they were in the process of getting a divorce, Jane still decided that she wanted to move to her hometown. And she asked John, can he come and help her? John agreed and he came to help. So John gets there, he starts to help her pack things, put things in the U-Haul. As John is in the U-Haul, he hears Jane scream his name, calls out for him. So John springs into action and goes inside the house, goes up to the room that Jane is in. He's like, what's going on? As he walks in the room, he sees Jane standing still, but she has like this blank expression on her face staring at the nightstand. Now, John says that he's not scared of anything, but he's definitely a little cautious, especially around Jane and her family at this point. So he's creeping in the room trying to figure out what's going on and what is she looking at. She stops and says, have you ever seen roots before? So as John is saying no, Jane starts to point at the wall. So John, following behind her, he looks at the wall and he sees 2 oil-like rings around the wall. He's getting closer and closer, getting ready to touch it, and Jane stops him. I wouldn't do that if I were you. John had never seen Jane like this. He could tell that she was obviously upset, but her reaction didn't give upset. It was almost as if she knew exactly what was going on, and she had just put 2 and 2 together. Remember that dream I told y'all about? Well, let's just say Jane definitely knew who did this. As they got closer and closer to the wall, they start to notice it was a picture of them. They still had the picture from when they got married, but it was an oily line drew in between Jane and John, almost as if someone wanted them to be separated. Now, John's side of the picture was pretty clean, pretty normal, outside of that line being drawn in between the both of them. But Jane's picture was smudged. It had a lot of oil on there. It was intentional. So much so that the picture was stuck to the nightstand. It wasn't going nowhere. Jane had an epiphany. It just dawned on her. This is why we were arguing so much. This is why we couldn't get along. And this is essentially why this breakup is even happening in the first place. It's Valerie, my auntie. Valerie had gotten extremely jealous yet again over the fact that she could no longer control Jane. When John came in the picture, they became inseparable. There was no Jane without John. There was no John without Jane. And they were genuinely happy. Valerie, she didn't like that. Jane was no longer easy to control anymore. And come to think of it, my suspicions is Valerie knew that Jane was gifted. Even though that she cursed and hexed every woman in the family at this point, she knew that Jane had gifts. She knew that Jane saw her put that spell on Grandma. And so the only way to avoid all of this coming out and hitting the fan is to get very close to Jane and knock her off your scent. So this got Jane to thinking, if my suspicions are correct, I know she put this spell on Grandma. Now Jane has all the evidence that she needs to take it to the family, in which she did. And listen, y'all, when they go to the grandma's room to, do their own inspection and see if this is true, they look under the bed and they see a huge red stain at the bottom of her mattress. The family was devastated, crushed, disgusted. All of this was happening because you were jealous. You broke up a family. You potentially cursed a man with a sickness and killed him. You constantly are sending attacks at your sister, put a spell on your sister and the boyfriend. So as you can imagine, the family was done. They basically kicked her ass to the curb and nobody talks to her anymore. They also had to burn down the house. Now, John says that the reason that he submitted this story is not to scare anybody or make up anything. He said this really happens, and he wants people to be more aware of who they decide to basically spend the rest of their life with. You got to be careful, because it could be you. If you have a freaky, unbelievable story that you want to tell, feel free to submit. It could be about betrayals, intuitions, warnings, love spells. The list goes on. I'll be waiting. See y'all on the next one.